Sometimes invisibility isn't a cloak. We don't choose to vanish. We just get good at dimming our light to keep everyone else's shining. The morning light streamed through the windows of a Seattle dental clinic, casting faint shadows across the polished reception area where Margot Eliza Bennett had worked for the past 14 years. At 41, she was the steady engine behind every smooth operation, the quiet hum in the background no one noticed until things went wrong. Her chestnut hair, streaked with early silver, was pinned neatly in a no-nonsense bun, and her blue-gray eyes locked on the monitor in front of her as she logged yet another successfully rescheduled appointment. Another small crisis solved. She ran her hands over her olive cardigan. Comfortable, reliable, forgettable. Just like her. "Miss Bennett?" came Dr. Nguyen's voice from his office. "Could you take a look at Mr. Alvarez's insurance paperwork? I'm lost in it." Of course he was. Everyone was, except Margot. She rose from her desk, the soles of her flats muffled on the carpet as she moved. A passing reflection in the glass partition caught her eye. A woman of 55% efficiency, 45% endurance, wrapped in denim and quiet dignity. She had perfected the skill of existing just enough to be useful, but never disruptive. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from Caleb, her husband of 18 years, whose texts had become as rare as his evenings at home. She ignored it, just as he had ignored their anniversary dinner the week before. "I'll be right there, Dr. Nguyen," she called out, her voice warm, reassuring. The same voice she used when their two kids, Micah and Rosie, asked why Dad hadn't made it to dinner again. That night on the drive home, she couldn't ignore the signs any longer. Caleb's car sat in the driveway, strange for a Wednesday. Usually, he worked late at his software firm, always blaming client deadlines and strategy calls. But not tonight. She found him upstairs, hunched over an open suitcase. At 42, his tall frame was still trim, his sandy brown hair annoyingly perfect. Even now, the scent of his cologne hung in the air, too strong, too fresh for someone who supposedly had just ended a workday. "Client emergency in San Francisco," he muttered, not meeting her eyes. His right hand smoothed his hair, his tell when he lied. "Back on Saturday." Margot stood quietly in the doorway, watching as he packed the burgundy tie she'd bought him last Christmas. The one he said was too nice for the office. "The company gala's Friday," she said softly. Caleb's hand froze for a beat. "Just internal folks this year. Budget stuff." He resumed his packing, brushing back his hair again. Another lie. "I see." And she did. She saw everything, the way he had been more careful with his grooming lately, the locked phone, the faint perfume that didn't belong to her lingering on his jackets. "The kids need help with their science fair projects this weekend," she added, her voice even. "They'll manage. Micah's 15, Rosie's 12. They're not babies." No, Margot thought, but they still needed a father who showed up. He zipped the suitcase shut with finality. Micah was 15 now and Rosie 12. "They don't need us hovering," Caleb said. No, Margot thought. What they needed was a father who showed up. As Caleb brushed past her with his suitcase, she caught a glimpse of them both in the full-length hallway mirror. Him, tall, composed, the very image of success and confidence. Her, small, faded, like a photo that had sat too long in the sun. But tonight, something in that reflection had shifted. For the first time, she saw the steel in her spine, the quiet endurance in her posture, the result of years spent holding everyone else together. She watched him go, listened as his car pulled out of the driveway. Then she walked straight to her closet. She pushed aside the practical cardigans and work slacks until her fingers brushed the edge of fabric she'd almost forgotten, the blue dress she'd bought months ago and never worn. Margot didn't need to check his company's social feeds to confirm there would be photos of Friday's event. She didn't need to see him beside Kelsey Dawes, the 20-something marketing associate with flawless blowouts and red-bottom heels. What she needed was already here, buried under years of making herself smaller. Her voice, her strength, herself. She hung the blue dress on the front of the closet door. For the first time in years, she wasn't asking permission to be visible. Friday morning arrived crisp and unusually bright for Seattle. Margot sat at the kitchen island, idly scrolling her phone as her kids hurried through breakfast. An email newsletter from Caleb's firm flashed across the screen. Annual Northmark Partners Gala, a night to remember. "Mom, can you sign this?" Micah slid a permission form toward her. At 15, he was already taller than she was. Caleb's frame, but her thoughtful eyes. "Science museum field trip?" she asked, reaching for a pen. "Yeah, Dad said he'd go with us," Micah muttered. Then his voice trailed off. Rosie, perched on a bar stool nearby, rolled her eyes. "But Dad's in San Francisco," she said, complete with air quotes. At 12, she had already developed a radar for lies. "We saw the company's Instagram," she added matter-of-factly. "They're posting about the gala tonight." Margot's hand froze mid-signature. Of course they knew. In this age, secrets had the shelf life of a ripe peach. "I'll chaperone," she said calmly, adding her signature with a flourish that surprised even her. "And tonight, I have plans of my own." Both kids looked up, interest flickering past their usual teenage detachment. They weren't used to their mother doing anything that wasn't centered around their needs or someone else's schedule. After the school drop-off, Margot headed straight for Westlake Avenue, where the upscale salon she'd passed for years finally pulled her in like gravity. Through the wide glass windows, she watched women step out transformed, not into new people, but sharper, freer versions of themselves. "I'd like a haircut," she told the stylist, a calm woman with soft eyes and steady hands. "Something different, something that feels like me." As strands of her chestnut hair fell to the floor, so too did pieces of the uncertainty she'd carried for far too long. Hair fell softly to the floor, carrying with it years of second-guessing and quiet self-doubt. Margot thought briefly of Kelsey Dawes, young, driven Kelsey, who probably believed she had just secured something of value in Caleb. But all Kelsey was really getting was a man who smoothed his hair when he lied and vanished when life got hard. The stylist turned Margot's chair to face the mirror. Her breath caught. The modern bob framed her face just right, emphasizing her cheekbones, drawing out the clarity in her steely blue eyes. She looked awake. But even as she studied her reflection, a flicker of uncertainty passed through her. What if Rosie and Micah didn't recognize her? Didn't like this version? What if this change didn't feel like power tomorrow, but like loss? The doubt was brief, but real. She gripped the chair's armrest lightly, then exhaled. This was still her, just clearer, louder, finally seen. Not just physically awake, but inwardly alert, present in a way she hadn't felt in years. The face looking back wasn't unfamiliar, but it was sharper, clearer. It held something she hadn't seen in a long time: intention. This wasn't the face of someone bracing herself for disappointment. This was a woman stepping into her own space, on her own terms. Back home, Margot stepped into her bedroom and pulled open her closet doors. The blue dress still hung there, bold and quiet. It wasn't flashy or desperate, just undeniable. It was exactly who she needed to be tonight. Her phone buzzed. A message from Caleb lit up the screen. "Going great in SF. Big deal closing. Don't wait up." She didn't reply. She deleted it and opened her laptop instead. A quick search gave her all the details she needed. Northmark Partners Annual Gala, 8 p.m., Harborview Ballroom at the Langford Hotel. As evening neared, Margot took her time. She applied her makeup carefully, not to conceal anything, but to define the woman staring back at her in the mirror. The dress skimmed her silhouette without clinging, the color deep and cool against her skin. Her new haircut moved freely, and the glints of silver in her hair didn't age her. They armored her. Each stroke of eyeliner, each sweep of blush felt like ceremony, an act of reclamation. She wasn't preparing for battle. She was preparing to be seen. There was nothing to fight, only something to assert. Her right to be exactly who she was, without apology. "Mom?" Rosie appeared in the doorway, eyes wide. "You look different." "Good different or bad different?" Margot asked as she clasped a delicate silver necklace. "Strong different," Rosie said. The quiet awe in her voice made Margot pause. Her daughter looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. "I'll be home late," Margot said, picking up her clutch. "Mrs. Raines next door will check on you too?" "Are you going to Dad's thing?" Micah asked, stepping in behind his sister. His tone aimed for casual but missed. "I'm going somewhere," Margot replied truthfully. "Somewhere I wasn't invited." Sometimes those are the places we need to show up the most. She hugged them both, breathing in the familiar scent of teenage shampoo and dreams, and walked out. Her heels clicked firmly against the concrete driveway. The night air carried a cool bite, the first signal of Seattle's slow march into fall. But Margot didn't feel cold. For the first time in years, she felt warm, with the heat of clarity, purpose, and something close to fury, but steadier. She wasn't going to the Langford to confront anyone. She wasn't chasing answers. She was going to remind them and herself that she didn't need permission to exist fully in the world. As she drove through the city's twinkling streets, hands steady on the wheel, Margot thought of all the times she had shrunk herself to make space for Caleb's ambition. Not tonight. She was going to do something different tonight. She was going to take up space. The Langford Hotel glowed like a gem in the Seattle night. Margot handed her keys to the valet, ignoring his mildly puzzled look, clearly wondering if she belonged at an event like this. The grand entrance rose before her, awash in golden light pouring through revolving doors that had welcomed decades of Seattle's corporate elite. Inside, the ballroom thrummed with the specific tension of professional success, the clinking of champagne flutes, the strategic mingling disguised as casual banter, the quiet symphony of power dressed in silk and smiles. Classical music floated from a string quartet tucked into a corner, but underneath it pulsed a deeper current, secrets and status. Margot stood in the doorway for a moment, letting her eyes adjust to the soft glow of crystal chandeliers. Her presence caused a ripple. At first barely noticeable, then unmistakable. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. The marketing team from Floor 8 stared, expressions shifting from curiosity to surprise to something bordering reverence. And then, Caleb. She spotted him instantly. He stood by the bar, leaning toward Kelsey Dawes, who wore a striking red dress and a rehearsed expression of wide-eyed interest. Caleb's hand rested lightly on her lower back. It was a familiar gesture. Margot knew it from years ago, when that same touch had once held promises instead of pretense. Caleb noticed her. His hand dropped instantly, like he'd touched something hot. His entire posture changed, shoulders straightening, complexion draining, despite his ever-present tan. Kelsey followed his gaze, her glossy lips parting in a small, stiff gasp. But Margot didn't walk toward them. Instead, she made her way calmly to the bar. "White wine, please," she said to the bartender, her voice calm but audible enough for the nearby crowd. Something crisp. "Mrs. Bennett?" a woman's voice said warmly. "I'm Evelyn Parker, head of operations." The woman, probably in her mid-50s, radiated a confidence born from decades of proving herself. "I don't believe we've met," Evelyn continued, "but I've heard your name through the Pacific Med Real Estate Group." Margot accepted her wine and the conversation with ease. "Yes, the Hawthorne portfolio. It was a complex one," she said. "Handled masterfully, from what I've been told," Evelyn replied, her eyes bright with genuine interest. "Would you join me? I'd love to hear your perspective on long-term care properties." As they stepped into a quieter corner, Margot could feel Caleb's eyes following her. She could picture him smoothing back his hair, hesitating. She could sense Kelsey's nerves, a crack beginning to form in her polished facade, her confidence sagging like her designer dress in July humidity. But for the first time in years, Margot didn't care what Caleb did. She was fully immersed in a conversation about property growth, zoning ordinances, and market trends with someone who actually valued her input. When the quartet began playing The Way You Look Tonight, Margot excused herself with grace and walked, alone, toward the dance floor. The whispers built around her, a woman dancing alone at a corporate gala. But Margot moved with the kind of quiet certainty that comes when a person finally stops asking for permission to exist. Her blue dress caught the overhead lights, making her appear almost luminous. She closed her eyes, letting the music carry her. A single song, a single moment of serenity in the middle of a buzzing room. When she opened them again, she noticed other women watching, some with envy, others with something closer to recognition in their gaze. She saw her story reflected in their eyes, of silence, of sacrifice, of long years dimming their light. Later, as she wrapped her evening, Evelyn Parker approached her once more. "That was some entrance," she said quietly, "and an even better exit." Margot smiled as she took her coat from the attendant. "Sometimes," she said, "just showing up is the statement." "There's a vacancy opening on our executive team," Evelyn added, almost offhand. "Senior operations manager. We're looking for someone who understands both the numbers and the people, someone who can see the full landscape." She slipped a business card into Margot's hand. "Think about it." As Margot walked toward the exit, she passed near where Caleb and Kelsey still stood. The scent of his cologne drifted over, familiar but now tinged with something foreign. Caleb stepped forward, mouth parting to speak. Margot kept walking. Her heels clicked against the polished marble. Each step, a punctuation mark. She was done writing that chapter. Outside, the October air had cooled, but she felt steady and warm. She had arrived at the Langford Hotel as Caleb Bennett's invisible wife. She was leaving as Margot Eliza Bennett, a woman who had just remembered how to burn bright again. Saturday morning arrived with soft rain tapping the windows of the Bennett home. Margot sat at the kitchen counter, still in her robe, fingers wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. The blue dress hung in the laundry room, proof that last night hadn't been a dream. The house felt different, not empty. Open, quiet in a new way, a kind of space waiting to be claimed. Her phone had been buzzing since dawn, missed calls from Caleb, unread texts, an email from Evelyn Parker about the executive position. But Margot just sat, letting the warmth of the coffee settle in her hands and the rain erase what was left of her old self. "Mom?" Micah shuffled into the kitchen, his hair tousled from sleep. "You okay?" She looked at her son, really looked. He had Caleb's height, but her calm awareness. He always seemed to feel what others didn't say. "I'm different," she said simply. "And yes, I'm okay." Rosie appeared next, already dressed, even though it was early. She went straight to the pantry. "I'm making breakfast," she declared. Her tone left no room for debate. Rosie measured pancake mix, while Micah set the table without being asked. Margot stood in the middle of it all, noticing things. Really noticing. The doorbell rang. Everyone paused. "I'll get it," she said, rising. She already knew who it would be. The soft thud of her slippers on the hardwood echoed down the hall as Margot made her way to the front door. Caleb stood on the porch, rain soaking into his expensive coat. His usually perfect hair wasn't styled, it was unsettled, messy, the result of real stress, caused by her. "Margot," he said, voice hoarse. "Can we talk?" She looked at him. This man she had shared 18 years with, this man who now felt like a stranger. "The kids are making breakfast," she said simply. "I've been calling. I know." Her hand rested on the edge of the door. She didn't open it wider. She didn't close it either. "I'm not interested in your explanations," she said evenly. "They're just more stories, Caleb. Things you say to make yourself feel okay about what you've done. It's not what you think. Isn't it?" Her tone stayed steady, but her fingers gripped the door tighter. "You're going to tell me Kelsey means nothing, that it was a mistake, that you love your family." She shook her head once. "The truth is, you love the idea of us. The doting wife, the admiring kids, the house that looks good in pictures. We're props, Caleb, in the version of your life you like to show people." "That's not fair," he said, but even as he protested, his right hand moved to smooth his hair. From inside, she heard the faint sound of the kitchen radio switching on, Rosie's quiet way of giving them privacy. The smell of coffee and pancakes drifted through the hallway, grounding warm, real, against the wet chaos outside. "I'm going back in," Margot said. "The kids are waiting. If you want to join us for breakfast, you can. But only if you're ready to be real. Not Caleb Bennett, the polished guy from the office, but their father, who has some work to do." He hesitated, his hand halfway to his head again, then dropped it. I'll call later." Margot watched him walk back to his car, his shoulders hunched against the drizzle. She didn't feel triumphant. There was no thrill in seeing him uncomfortable, just a quiet, solid certainty that she had done the right thing. Back in the kitchen, Rosie was flipping pancakes, perfectly golden, while Micah laid out bowls of fresh fruit with quiet precision. "Dad?" Rosie asked, eyes still on the pan. "He had to go," Margot answered, taking a sip of her coffee. "But we're here," Micah said, dropping extra blueberries on Rosie's plate, her favorite. "What are we doing today?" he asked. Margot glanced around the kitchen. The pale green walls had faded. She'd never liked them, but Caleb had. The heavy curtains, chosen to match furniture they no longer even owned, blocked more light than they let in. "I think," she began slowly, "we're going to start with this room. New paint, new curtains, something that feels like us." "Can I pick the color?" Rosie asked, sliding a stack of pancakes onto a plate. "We'll all pick," Margot said with a small smile. Together, they sat down at the kitchen table. Rain tapped softly against the windows, creating a gentle cocoon around their small family. Margot listened to her children talk and laugh, their ease, their presence, and their quiet relief in her strength. Later, as she cleared the plates, Margot caught herself humming, not a sad tune, not a romantic one, just something light, unformed, a new melody for a new life. The home office had always been her someday room. Boxes lined the walls, years' worth of papers labeled with dates and vague intentions, review later, insurance, taxes, kids' drawings, articles to read. They'd gathered dust while life rushed forward. On Monday morning, after dropping Micah and Rosie off at school, Margot called in sick, for the first time in 12 years. She stood at the doorway of that long-ignored room, a bundle of garbage bags in one hand, a stack of empty filing bins from the hardware store in the other. "Time to stop waiting," she muttered, tying her hair back before stepping inside. 10 minutes in, she had to sit down. The air in the room felt thick with memory. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached into the first box, not because of the dust, but because of what it meant, touching pieces of a life she'd stopped tending. She wiped at her eyes once, quickly, then again. No sobs, no dramatic collapse, just quiet overwhelm. The first box she pulled open was filled with old credit card statements from 2019. She remembered saving them to track expenses, trying to make sense of where all their money was going. But now, looking at the yellowing receipts, the pattern was obvious. Dinner charges from business, meetings that weren't. Hotel stays in cities Caleb swore he never traveled to. Jewelry bills for pieces that never landed in her collection. She fed them into the shredder without hesitation. Each slip of paper felt like a weight lifted, like removing someone else's fingerprints from her life. She didn't feel sorrow or anger anymore. She just felt done. Finished with making excuses for what never fit. Her phone buzzed. Evelyn Parker's name flashed on the screen. Margot took a breath and answered. "I hope this isn't too early," Evelyn said, her tone as warm as ever. "I wanted to speak with you about the senior operations manager role before we post it publicly." Margot glanced around the cluttered room, her jaw set. "Actually," she said, "your timing's perfect. Can you meet for lunch? The Westridge Grill noon?" They agreed, and with a surge of energy, Margot went back to work. The next box held Micah's elementary report cards. She picked a few special ones to keep and photographed the rest. Rosie's artwork followed. The standout pieces were saved for framing, the rest scanned and discarded. She uncovered an old journal from the days she first suspected Caleb's betrayal. The pages were full of questions she had never dared to ask, confrontations she had rehearsed in her mind but never voiced. She didn't need to read them now. Those pages belonged to someone else, a woman who had waited too long. And she was no longer that woman. The version of her who had needed proof, apologies, explanations, that woman had quietly stepped aside. In her place stood someone who didn't just survive the questions. She outgrew them. The journal joined the shred pile. By 11:30, Margot had changed into a charcoal gray pantsuit she'd bought years ago, but had rarely worn. Caleb used to say it made her look too corporate. She brushed her sleek new bob, applied soft makeup, and picked up her portfolio. At Westridge Grill, the hum of business chatter filled the air. Evelyn waved from a booth near the back, poised in a classic navy blazer. "You look ready for battle," she said with a smile as Margot slid into the seat. "Ready for change," Margot corrected, opening the menu. "Over salads and iced tea," Evelyn broke it down. "It's demanding," she warned. "You'd be overseeing our full medical real estate portfolio across the Northwest. The hours are long, the clients are demanding, and you'll need to rebuild a few relationships your husband, complicated." Margot met Evelyn's eyes without flinching. "You mean the ones who saw me at the gala?" "Among others." Evelyn's eyes creased slightly in a knowing smile. "But that's exactly why I want you. You showed more poise and strategic instinct in one night than most people show in their whole careers." "I'll need to give notice," Margot said, pulse quickening, though her voice remained even. "At the dental office." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. 2 weeks? "We can work with that." Back home, Margot returned to the office she had just cleared and began cleaning with renewed energy. She found her college diploma, still in the original envelope. She'd never framed it, Caleb said their wedding photos deserved the wall space. In another box, she discovered a stack of old business cards, remnants of her early years in commercial property management before marriage. Names, numbers, connections she'd let fade while keeping up with Caleb's calendar and their social obligations. The final box was the heaviest. Inside were photo albums from the years of their marriage. Flipping through, she saw what she hadn't noticed at the time, how she had slowly slipped into the background of their family memories. How her smile grew more staged, less real. She kept one album for Micah and Rosie. The rest she boxed up and stored away. By sunset, the room had transformed. Empty shelves stood waiting for new books and fresh ambitions. The desk, no longer buried in paper, held only her laptop and a sleek new planner. Her phone buzzed. A text from Caleb. "We need to talk. About the house and the kids." Margot looked around her quiet, clean office, then typed her reply. "Yes, we do. I'll have my lawyer reach out tomorrow." She set the phone aside and walked to the window. Outside, the October sky was drenched in the orange and violet of early dusk, a sky full of forward motion. On her desk, Evelyn's business card rested beside her planner, twin tokens of the future she had finally stopped postponing. The shredder gave one final hum as she fed it a last pile of papers. With each grind and curl, she felt lighter. She wasn't just clearing space. She was clearing the way forward. Margot's first day at Northmark Partners began with a feeling she couldn't quite name. As she walked through the building's sleek glass lobby, carrying a new leather briefcase that had replaced her battered canvas tote, she could sense it. Eyes followed. Conversations paused. She wasn't Caleb Bennett's soft-spoken wife anymore. She was the woman in the blue dress, the one who had quietly unraveled a polished illusion. Her office was on the 15th floor, facing east. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, bouncing off crisp white walls and clean metal trim. Evelyn had seen to every detail: a modern desk, an ergonomic chair, a top-tier computer setup, and on the desk beside her keyboard stood a single silver photo frame, with a note tucked inside for new memories. "LP, Mrs. Bennett?" The young man appeared in the doorway, holding a tablet. "I'm Daniel Fisher, your assistant. Miss Parker asked me to brief you on your schedule." "Please, call me Margot," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. She noticed the shift instantly. His shoulders eased, his posture relaxed. Her tone still carried warmth, even in this polished new world. The morning blurred into a carousel of meetings and introductions. Margot absorbed every name, every face, every project detail with the same quiet efficiency that once kept a dental practice running. Only here, her skills were seen, appreciated, valued. It felt strange at first to be noticed not for who she'd been tethered to, but for what she actually brought to the table. She wasn't just surviving in this environment, she was beginning to belong. During lunch, whispers floated from the break room. "Can you believe she's working here now? I heard Caleb is living with the marketing assistant. Did you see her at the gala? That dress?" Margot poured herself a cup of coffee, stirred in a splash of cream, then turned slowly to the group. "The coffee's fresh," she said lightly, "and I prefer direct questions over background commentary." The room stilled. Then a young woman, barely older than Rosie, stepped forward. "How do you do it?" she asked. "Act so normal." Margot considered the question. "By remembering that other people's actions don't define my value." She didn't say it to sound composed or clever. She said it because it was the only truth that had kept her moving. Because once she stopped letting other people shrink her, she discovered she was never small to begin with. Back at her desk, she lost herself in the firm's sprawling healthcare real estate portfolio. It was intricate and messy, but energizing. She pored over leases, analyzed property data, highlighted gaps others had overlooked. By mid-afternoon, she was deep into contracts, tracking what had slipped past previous managers. At 3, her phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Raines, her neighbor. "Saw Caleb moving boxes into a downtown apartment. Thought you should know? Want me to bring over my lasagna?" The old Margot might have smiled politely and said no, kept up the image. But instead she typed, "Lasagna sounds perfect. The kids would love to see you." A second text followed immediately. "Bringing wine too. Girls need to stick together." Margot smiled at the screen, realizing how much she appreciated these small acts of loyalty. The kind of simple, steady support she had once mistaken as unnecessary and now recognized as essential. By 5:30, Margot had already completed her first major task, flagging 3 underperforming properties and drafting a preliminary turnaround strategy for each. She was packing up when Evelyn appeared at the door. "How was day 1?" she asked. "Productive," Margot said, handing her a folder. "These 3 need urgent attention." Evelyn skimmed it, her brows arched in surprise. "This is excellent. But why are you targeting Lincoln Heights Medical Center first?" Margot didn't hesitate. "Because that's where Kelsey failed." Evelyn looked up, intrigued. "She mishandled their lease renewal last quarter," Margot continued. "It's in the file. They're already exploring options with our competitors. You think you can turn it around?" "I think I understand something Kelsey didn't." Margot closed her briefcase. "In healthcare, trust is everything." "Clients need stability, not flash," Evelyn said. "They want someone who's in it for the long haul, who remembers their concerns and solves problems before they become crises." Her smile held something deeper, like someone who'd spent years working with people who never looked twice at women who ran things quietly. Margot nodded. She understood, deeply. The elevator ride to the lobby was less tense than the morning's ascent. Several coworkers nodded at her in passing. One even mentioned her sharp questions during the department meeting. Outside, the October sun was dipping lower in the sky as Margot walked to her car, heels clicking with purpose across the pavement. She passed Caleb's reserved parking spot, now empty, and didn't spare it a glance. There had been a time when passing that spot would have stung, reminded her of how many things once belonged to him, including space and silence. But now, it was just an empty square of asphalt. And she no longer felt the need to fill it. At home, Micah and Rosie were setting the table while Mrs. Raines checked on the lasagna. The house smelled like garlic and kindness. "Tough day?" Mrs. Raines asked, pulling the dish from the oven. "Different day," Margot replied, slipping off her blazer and rolling up her sleeves. "But I'm done with easy." Easy had cost her too much, years spent cushioning egos, filtering her voice, absorbing blame that wasn't hers. Now she wanted real, even if it was complicated, especially if it was complicated. Through the kitchen window, she saw a few curious neighbors peeking as they passed, feigning indifference. Let them look, she thought. Let them see what rebuilding looked like. A family adapting, friends standing in, a woman becoming visible again. But even as she smiled and served lasagna, a quiet knot formed beneath her ribs. She was doing well, by all appearances. But there was a part of her still measuring every move, every glance, every comment in the office. What if her next step wasn't as sure? What if this calm was just the eye of the storm? She swallowed it down, focusing on what was in front of her. Dinner, warmth, her kids' laughter. One moment at a time. 3 weeks into her new role at Northmark Partners, Margot sat in a conference room surrounded by reports and client files. The Lincoln Heights Medical Center meeting was tomorrow. She'd spent days preparing. "Mrs. Bennett?" Daniel peeked his head in. "You should know. Mr. Bennett and Ms. Dawes are both listed for tomorrow's meeting." Margot didn't pause. Her pen kept moving across the page. "Thank you, Daniel. Please make sure there are enough copies of the proposal for everyone." Only after he left did she allow herself a breath. Of course Caleb would be there. Technically, he was still lead on the account. And Kelsey? She'd show up to save face after mishandling the lease renewal. They weren't threats anymore. They were just variables in a system she already understood. Her phone buzzed with a message from Caleb. "We should go over the agenda tonight." "Dinner?" She replied without hesitation. "No need. I'm prepared." That evening, as she helped Rosie with biology homework, another message came in. "This is my account. Don't make it personal." Across the room, Micah looked up from his calculus textbook, catching her slight frown. "Dad?" he asked. "Work?" Margot said truthfully. They had agreed, no more polite lies in this house. "Is he trying to ruin your new job?" Rosie asked, her brow furrowing. "No," Margot said firmly. "He's trying to protect his turf." She met their eyes. "There's a difference." She set her phone down. "Now," she said, smiling at Rosie, "tell me more about mitochondria." The next morning, Margot chose her outfit with precision. A slate gray suit, perfectly tailored, simple pearl earrings, and a kind of quiet self-assurance no brand could manufacture. She arrived at the office early, reviewing her presentation one last time. At 9:55, she heard Caleb's voice in the hallway. Charismatic, measured, the one he reserved for big clients. Margot straightened her papers, took a sip of water, and waited. They entered as a group. Dr. Catherine Wu, Chief of Operations at Lincoln Heights, 3 board members, Caleb in his signature power suit, and Kelsey in a dress that tried just a little too hard to project professionalism. Margot noticed how Kelsey hovered close to Caleb, but didn't stand beside him. A new dance. One choreographed for damage control. The dynamic was familiar, but Margot felt none of the heat that had once come with it. Not intimidation, not hurt, just clarity. This wasn't her fight anymore, it was her proving ground. "Thank you all for coming," Margot began, voice steady. "I've reviewed every concern raised in your last quarterly meeting. What I'm presenting today is a comprehensive response with actionable solutions." For the next hour, she walked them through it. Cost breakdowns, facility schedules, preventive strategies. Everything clearly organized. Everything focused on the client's real needs. She watched Dr. Wu's expression evolve, from guarded to intrigued. "These are impressive proposals," Dr. Wu said, folding her hands when Margot finished. "Especially the proactive maintenance. It's exactly what we've been asking for." Caleb leaned forward, smoothing his hair. "I'm glad you like the direction we're taking, as account lead." "Actually," Dr. Wu interrupted, "I'd prefer to work directly with Mrs. Bennett going forward. Her understanding of medical operations is clear." Kelsey flushed. "I prepared marketing materials," she said. "What we need," Dr. Wu said evenly, "is someone who understands that a medical facility is not a retail brand. We need consistency, not a campaign." There was no malice in Dr. Wu's tone, only certainty. The kind Margot had earned, not demanded. And that made all the difference. After the clients left, Caleb lingered by the conference table. Kelsey hovered awkwardly near the door. "That was quite a show," Caleb said, tone-edged, the one Margot remembered from arguments past. When he felt small, he reached for sharpness. "That was quite a plan," Margot replied coolly, collecting her materials. "One based on actually listening to the client. I've managed that account for 5 years. And in those 5 years," she asked without looking up, "did you ever show up during their overnight hours? Speak with their janitorial staff? Learn why certain wings require tight environmental control?" His silence was telling. "This isn't about you, Caleb, or us. It's about doing the job right." She moved toward the door, pausing briefly in front of Kelsey. "Your marketing kit was beautifully designed, just not what this client needed." In the hallway, she overheard Caleb's voice as he spoke softly to Kelsey. "She's just trying to prove something." Margot smiled faintly. He still didn't get it. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She was finally doing what she had always been capable of. Back in her office, Margot found a message from Evelyn waiting in her inbox. "Board meeting tomorrow. Bring your ideas for the rest of the medical portfolio. They're paying attention now." She turned to the window. The Seattle skyline shimmered beneath the autumn sun, glass and steel, reflecting light and shadow in sharp contrast. Somewhere in one of those towers, Caleb and Kelsey were probably talking about her, trying to strategize their next move. But Margot's mind had already moved forward. She was thinking about the meeting, about the underperforming sites that still needed a plan, about all the work she had spent a lifetime preparing to do, without realizing it. She opened her laptop and began to type. November in Seattle painted the city in dusky gold and deep crimson. Margot stood in her newly redecorated living room, fingers wrapped around a warm mug of coffee. The walls, now a muted sage green, made the space feel calm and open. One wall was lined with new bookshelves, slowly filling with titles she had always wanted to read, but never had time for. The empty spots no longer unsettled her. Where Caleb's oversized leather chair had once taken over the room, there was now a soft armchair and lamp. A reading nook that invited quiet. Where stiff family portraits had once hung, curated to perfection, now were black and white photographs of the Puget Sound and city parks, all taken during her weekend walks. Her phone buzzed. A text from Evelyn. "Board meeting moved to 9 a.m. Big news." Upstairs, she could hear Micah and Rosie in the kitchen, the rhythm of their mornings no longer reliant on her. They had adjusted, with a resilience that still surprised her. "Mom," Rosie called up. "Dad wants to take us to dinner tonight. Just us." Margot paused at her closet, pulling out a deep burgundy blazer. How do you feel about that? She called down. Weird, Micah admitted. But maybe. Good weird. Then go, she said, selecting black slacks to match. Just be honest. With him. With yourselves. At Northmark Partners, the office buzzed with low-key intensity. People huddled in corners, hushed conversations cutting off when Margot passed. In the conference room, she took her usual seat and laid out her weekly reports. Evelyn entered last, flanked by 3 board members, her expression tight with contained energy. Everyone, she began, let's get to the point. Meridian Health Systems has approached us. A collective shift rippled through the room. They want us to manage their entire East Coast portfolio, 23 facilities, from Maine to Virginia. The murmurs grew louder. Meridian was a healthcare giant, known for innovation, exacting standards, and massive contracts. They've asked specifically for our medical properties team, Evelyn said, her eyes locking on Margot. Finding Margot, apparently. Evelyn's voice carried easily through the boardroom. Dr. Wu from Lincoln Heights sits on their board, and she was quite impressed with our recent upgrades. Margot felt every gaze in the room. 6 weeks ago, these same people had watched her walk into their company Gala, uninvited. Now they were watching her steer their future. Mrs. Bennett will lead the transition team, Evelyn announced. And in light of this development, the board has approved a new role, Director of Healthcare Properties, East Coast Division. The title didn't overwhelm her. It fit. Like something she'd grown into, not because she had to, but because she chose to. The silence that followed Evelyn's announcement wasn't skepticism. It was acknowledgement, and it wrapped around her like quiet applause. Later, back in her office, Margot found a small wrapped box on her desk. Inside, a silver nameplate. Margot E. Bennett, Director of Healthcare Properties, the was. Her phone buzzed. A message from Caleb. Heard about the promotion. Congratulations. Can we talk? As she considered her reply, Daniel appeared in the doorway holding a large bouquet, white orchids arranged with striking elegance. The card read, "To the woman who stopped waiting. Thank you for showing us how it's done." The women of Northmark Partners. Margot ran her fingers over her nameplate, tracing the engraved title. She thought of the woman she had once been, who rearranged her life to fit someone else's. That woman hadn't vanished. She had evolved. She hadn't fought to be seen. She had simply stopped hiding, and the world had adjusted to her clarity. She picked up her phone and typed, "Thank you. Yes, we can talk. About the kids, the house, the divorce, business stays at the office." Caleb's reply came fast. "Fair enough. Coffee tomorrow, 1 p.m. Cafe by the courthouse? We can meet with the lawyers after." That evening, after dinner with Micah and Rosie, Margot moved quietly through her home. She watered the new plants she'd added to each room, fluffed the throw pillows she'd picked for comfort, not style, and finally sank into her reading nook with a long postponed novel. The house creaked around her, settling into its new rhythm. Its spaces no longer echoed with loss. They felt open, ready. In the kitchen, the gentle hum of the new refrigerator sounded. The old one, Caleb's choice, had been too big, too loud, too much. Her phone lit up, a photo from Rosie, father and kids at dinner. The smiles looked almost natural, progress, of a different kind. Margot turned back to her book, but her thoughts wandered to the Meridian project, to its scale, its challenges, its potential. Her fingers itched to plan, strategize, build. This wasn't just a new job. It was a new language, and she was fluent in it now. Outside, dry leaves scraped across the sidewalk in the early November breeze. Inside, under the soft glow of her reading lamp, Margot smiled. She had stopped living in the spaces others left for her. Now, she was making her own. The Meridian Health Systems Regional Conference was being held at the same hotel where just 2 months ago, Margot had walked in wearing a blue dress and quietly changed her life. Now, standing in the Langford's Grand Ballroom, newly converted into a conference space, she watched staff arrange chairs for the next morning's presentation. "The PowerPoint is ready," Daniel said, tablet in hand, "and the property tours are confirmed for next week." "You sure you want to present solo?" he added. "The other directors are all bringing their full teams." Margot adjusted one chair just slightly to line up with the others. "Perfect," she said. "Sometimes less is more, Daniel," Margot said, smiling faintly. "I learned that the hard way." Back in her office, she found an unexpected visitor. Kelsey Dawes stood hesitantly in the doorway, visibly uneasy. "Can I help you?" Margot asked, voice neutral, gesturing toward a chair. Kelsey stepped in but didn't sit. "I'm leaving the company. I'm moving to Chicago," she said, her hands twisted together. "Caleb and I? It's over." Margot continued reviewing her presentation notes, letting the silence stretch. Finally, she looked up. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," Kelsey struggled, words heavy. "You could have been awful to me. You could have trashed my career or at least spread rumors. But instead," she continued, voice cracking, "you just did your job, better than anyone, and it made me realize how small I've been living." Margot set her pen down. "My success was never about you or him." She didn't say it with malice, just certainty. The kind that came from rebuilding her life piece by piece, not for revenge, not to outshine, but to reclaim something she never should have had to give up in the first place, herself. As the door closed behind Kelsey, Margot exhaled, but it didn't come easily. Her hands, now idle, felt strangely cold. For a brief moment, a voice she hadn't heard in months crept back in. "Are you sure you belong here?" She stood up quickly and crossed to the window, needing distance from the whisper. The view didn't calm her, but it anchored her. It reminded her that self-doubt didn't vanish. It just got quieter the more she kept showing up. After Kelsey left, Margot stood by the window and watched the early December darkness roll in across Seattle. Her phone buzzed. A text from Micah. "Break a leg tomorrow, Mom. Rosie says, knock 'em dead, but don't actually kill anyone." Margot smiled, typing back. "No promises. Dinner's in the fridge. Love you both." That evening, she stayed late, practicing her presentation one final time. The cleaning crew worked around her, accustomed by now to her presence after hours. In the stillness of the office, her voice grew stronger, clearer. Each repetition wasn't just about rehearsing words, it was about owning them. For the first time, she felt the weight of leadership settle on her shoulders without crushing her. It fit, like truth. The next morning dawned crisp and cold. Margot dressed deliberately, a charcoal suit, classic and tailored, minimal jewelry, and yes, comfortable shoes. She'd learned confidence moved better without blisters. The Langford's grand ballroom filled quickly. Healthcare execs, real estate professionals, and board members from both companies took their seats. From the back row, Evelyn offered a discreet thumbs up. As Margot stepped to the podium, she saw Caleb slip in. He looked thinner, his once perfect hair a bit off. Their eyes met briefly. Then she turned toward the crowd. "Good morning," she began, voice steady. "We're here today because healthcare is evolving, and the spaces where that care happens must evolve too." For the next hour, she laid out her vision, not just about managing properties, but designing environments that heal. She shared what she'd learned from her years in dental offices, late-night walkthroughs of facilities, and real data that showed why her model worked. "The Lincoln Heights renovation," she said in closing, "isn't just a success story. It's a blueprint. When we listen, truly listen to the people who use these spaces, when we value substance over show, we don't just manage buildings, we build futures." The applause was immediate and real. Dr. Wu, now Vice President of Operations at Meridian, was the first to stand. Questions followed, one after another, each more thoughtful than the last. Margot answered all of them with the calm certainty of someone who had done the work, someone who knew the ground, not just the theory. As the room began to clear, Caleb approached the podium. He looked older, uncertain in a way she'd never seen before. "That was," he began, then stopped. His hand moved reflexively toward his hair, then dropped. "You were always this capable, weren't you?" he asked quietly. "Even when I was too busy watching myself to see it." "Yes," Margot said, simply. "The kids told me about your promotion and the Meridian project." His smile came slowly this time, genuine, but edged with something close to regret. "You deserve it, all of it." "I know," she replied, collecting her materials. "But thank you for saying it." There was no vindication in her voice, no need to punctuate the moment with a lesson. His acknowledgement wasn't a gift, it was just a truth finally spoken aloud. She didn't need it, but it still felt good to hear. Over lunch with her team, still basking in the afterglow of the presentation, Margot's phone buzzed. A message from Evelyn. "Board wants to live stream your presentation across all offices. You've started something here." Margot looked around the table at her coworkers, now friends. They were throwing out ideas, dissecting her talk, suggesting next steps. They had witnessed her evolution, From Caleb Bennett's quiet wife to a leader in her own right, she had found her voice. And now, finally, everyone was listening. It was never about rising above them. It was about finally stepping into the space she'd always been meant to fill. And doing it without shrinking. The December air was sharp with the scent of snow as Margot laced up her new running shoes. She'd taken up jogging, not for weight loss, not to prove anything, but because she liked the rhythm of dawn, the sound of her own breath, the sense of moving forward. Her route that morning passed by the coffee shop where she and Caleb had signed the divorce papers. The meeting had been peaceful, surprisingly so. They had changed so much in 3 months that their signatures no longer felt like an end, but a release. Back home, Micah was making pancakes, his new Saturday tradition. The kitchen smelled like coffee and banana batter. "Mom," Rosie called from the dining room, "did you see the email from Dad about Christmas?" "Not yet," Margot said, pouring herself a glass of water. "Everything okay?" "He wants to host Christmas Eve at his new place," Micah explained, flipping a pancake with practiced ease. "And he asked if we could all spend Christmas morning here, together." Margot caught her breath from the run. 2 months ago, the idea would have felt impossible. Now, how do you two feel about that? "Weird," Rosie admitted, "but maybe good weird, like dinner last week." The doorbell rang. Mrs. Rain stood on the porch, holding up a folded newspaper. "Have you seen this?" The Seattle Business Journal's weekend edition featured a special section on women in commercial real estate. There, on the cover, was Margot speaking at the Meridian Conference. The headline read, "Changing Spaces, How One Director is Redefining Healthcare Real Estate." "They interviewed the Lincoln Heights team," Mrs. Raines said. Mrs. Raines pointed at the newspaper, beaming. "Dr. Wu called you a quiet revolution in comfortable shoes." Margot laughed, stepping aside to let her neighbor in. As Mrs. Raines settled at the table, more neighbors began to trickle in, drawn by the smell of banana pancakes and the quiet warmth that this home now radiated. A space Margot had reclaimed, not as a display, but as a real place to belong. They came with stories and easy laughter, with questions about the article and questions about paint colors. There was no performance here, no curated perfection, just connection. That was what she'd built. Not a facade, but a foundation. Her phone buzzed with messages about the article. One from Evelyn stood out. "Next week's board meeting, we're discussing scaling your model nationwide. Ready to stop being quiet?" Margot smiled and typed back. "I was never really quiet. People just weren't listening." After breakfast, as her neighbors helped clean up, a new kind of normal that still felt a little surreal, Margot moved through her house. The sage-green walls now held updated family photos. Micah at a debate, Rosie mid-dance recital, candid shots of them laughing. Nothing posed, nothing staged, just real. In her office, the orchids from her team had bloomed again, delicate but persistent. Her nameplate gleamed in the soft winter light, and above it, a single framed photograph, not of her face or her family, but of the blue dress, the one that started it all. Now framed like the moment of history it was. She looked at it sometimes not for what it represented, but for what it reminded her. Change doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. That dress hadn't been a declaration, it had simply been her stepping forward. Finally, Margot sat at her desk and opened Caleb's Christmas email. His words were measured, thoughtful. "The kids miss our old traditions. I miss who we tried to be. Maybe we can be something different, not married, but not enemies either. The kids deserve that. Maybe we do too." Margot thought back to the woman she'd been just 3 months earlier, standing in this very room, surrounded by boxes and years of postponed dreams. That woman had been afraid of space, of silence, of not knowing. Now she knew better. Empty didn't mean ending. Empty meant room to grow. She began to type, "Christmas morning sounds nice. I'll make coffee. You bring those cinnamon rolls the kids love. We'll figure out the rest as we go." Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, softening the edges of the world. Margot watched as the flakes floated past her window, each one tracing its own path. From the kitchen, she heard Rosie trying to teach Mrs. Raines a TikTok dance, while Micah launched into a debate about maple syrup with 2 of the neighbors. Her phone buzzed one last time. A text from Evelyn, "Ready for tomorrow?" Margot looked at her reflection in the window. The haircut suited her. Her eyes were bright. Her smile was steady, real. She replied, always. Not because she knew exactly what would come next, but because she finally trusted herself to handle whatever did. She turned from the window toward the laughter in the kitchen. And this time she didn't carry the weight of loss. She carried something better, possibility, strength, and the quiet, joyful truth of being exactly who she was meant to be. Margot Bennett had stopped waiting for life to happen. She was too busy living it. 1 year later, spring in Seattle arrived like a quiet celebration. Cherry blossoms lined the avenues, their soft petals drifting in the wind like memories of what once was. Inside the newly renovated headquarters of Northmark Partners, the conference room hummed with quiet anticipation. Margot, now Senior Vice President of Healthcare Properties, stood before a group of rising professionals. It was the company's first leadership development program for women in real estate. "I used to think strength meant being quiet," Margot told them, her calm voice cutting through the buzz. "I thought if I just worked hard enough, someone would notice. But life isn't about being noticed. It's about choosing to be seen." Their faces, young, eager, uncertain, reminded her of who she once was. Not lost, just paused. Waiting for a sign, a nudge, a permission slip that never came. She wanted them to leave with more than advice. She wanted them to leave knowing they didn't need to shrink to fit. After the session, Evelyn, recently named CEO, joined her for their traditional coffee walk. "The board approved your national expansion plan," Evelyn said casually. "They want you to lead the West Coast launch." Margot smiled. Once, such news would have sent her spiraling, worried about who she might disappoint. Now she only felt excitement. "I'll need to coordinate with the kids," she replied. "Micah's starting college tours. Rosie has a dance showcase coming up." They passed the Langford Hotel, where a wedding party spilled onto the sidewalk. The bride wore blue, not white. Margot reached for the silver key pendant around her neck, a gift from her team on her 1-year anniversary, a symbol of every door she had unlocked, and of every room she'd once been afraid to enter. That evening, at her favorite neighborhood cafe, where she now had her own table by the window, she met Caleb for their monthly co-parenting check-in. He looked more at ease now, content in his role at a smaller firm where he no longer needed to posture. "Remember this place?" he asked, stirring his coffee. "Our first real conversation, after everything." "I remember," Margot said. "You couldn't stop smoothing your hair." They could laugh about it now, acknowledge the past, without being stuck in it. "The kids mentioned the West Coast project," Caleb said. "That's incredible." "Life's too short to think small," she replied, words she'd once feared, now effortless. At home, her home, the air welcomed her. The sage-green walls now displayed the art she loved, books she actually had time to read, photographs of moments that mattered, Micah's debate win, Rosie's dance solo, dinners with neighbors who had become family. Her phone lit up, a message from Dr. Wu. "Just approved the final plans for the new pediatric center. You were right. Healing spaces matter." Margot stepped onto the back porch where her garden bloomed, tulips rising from the earth, reaching toward light, just like she had. There had been no single moment of transformation, just hundreds of quiet choices, showing up, speaking clearly, choosing herself. And somehow they had led her here. She thought about the woman in the blue dress who had walked into a ballroom alone and changed everything. That dress now rested in a box in her closet, not to cling to the past, but to honor how far she had come. The evening air was cool and full of possibility. Tomorrow would bring more work, more choices, more courage. But tonight, in her garden, under the soft glow of the porch light, Margot Eliza Bennett smiled. She had stopped waiting and started building. Not a life of perfection, but a life that was real, hers. Dear friend, what if I told you that the strongest thing you'll ever do is simply not give up on yourself? Margot's story reminds us that becoming isn't loud. It's often quiet, like choosing peace over proof, presence over performance. The Stoics believed that waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one. Margot chose to be, not wait, not wish, not wilt. She stepped forward even with trembling hands, and day by day, the life she wanted began to rise around her. You don't need to be ready, you just need to be willing. The next chapter doesn't require perfection, only your presence. You are not behind, you're simply being prepared. If this story stirred something in you, please like, share it with someone who needs it. and subscribe for more journeys of strength, healing, and becoming. We're building something beautiful here, and there's a seat at the table for you.